yeah, over time, I started to engage people with what I thought was like a more gentle presentation. I think it's something I talked to you about, where it was like, oh, you can invite a person if they respond to something you've posted, let's say, with something akin to, if not co-fueled by fear, to say, oh, okay, well, is this, let's walk through this together. Is that something you'd be willing to, like, let's kind of explore together? And who knows, maybe I have some misapprehensions, maybe you have some misapprehensions. But that would be gentle, right? It's sort of a little bit, it's like if you have a barking dog and you're like, hey puppy, hey pup, not your enemy, bud. You want to bark all you want, that's totally fine, but I'm not your enemy. Kind of put your hands up, bring your voice into a different place. You can also try being like, sometimes if barking dogs, you have to be like, hey, no, you know what I mean? Depends on the dog. Yeah, it depends on the dog. But like, in general, like if I'm around a barking dog, and I feel like this energy is very similar because it is animalistic almost. I tried that gentle thing. And the problem is I can't say the gentle route has worked any better, but it is less stressful for me, because if I try to meet the energy of someone who's like, then I'm a little bit in that place. And I was like, I don't necessarily want to be there, because I don't need to be there, because I'm not in that anxiety state. You know what I mean? But that can look unempathic if you don't kind of at least co-match or seek to match someone's energy. But you know much more about that, I think, in terms of like space holding and that sort of thing, and like just giving people space to be how they are. And I'm more of an actor person. So for me, it's either like in improv training, a very like basic potential tenet of how to play a scene, for example. If someone comes in with a particular energy or activity or initiation or whatever, you can then choose to, this is how one teacher phrased it, mirror complement or mirror copy. So someone's out on stage and they're frantically, whatever, packing a bag. You can run on stage and being like, the taxi's here in four minutes. Let's go, go, go. And you just start like doing the same energy that they have. Or you can come in and be like, what's the rush? I'm gonna just make some breakfast. So if you wanna, you know what I mean? You kind of like, and both of those can feel very different. And both of those actually increase the tension of the scene. That's kind of like what they're for. So that is kind of my tendency, is to like both of those, because if you do that, if you are slow to a person who's anxious, they're going to get more anxious. If you're anxious with an anxious person, they're going to get more anxious. Now, this doesn't always, but I'm telling you, real life doesn't always work like this, but it often does. If you come in with any energy, either placating or agreeing, people intend to, I've noticed, if they're in that anxious state, get more anxious. So in some ways, Andy, you might be perfectly matched for anxious people, because you come in a lot of times with like a strong neutral energy.
Yes, I have the strongest neutral energy. Yes, and I am Andy Swindler.
And I'm Brendan McNamara.
And we are Totally Classic. And yeah, I relate to that. And I'm wondering, in that example of improv, if there's just something about the nature of change, like changing the frequency or changing the energy or changing the direction. And I think that's guides so much of what we talk about here, is just the nature of change.
Yes. Yeah.
And in this episode specifically, we're talking about, it's a carry on part 2 to develop more questions around the question, is fear dangerous? And it's funny, I was last night driving out, my dad was in the hospital, seems to be okay, just getting some tests, but heading out there, and all day yesterday, my whole nervous system, it was like even hard to describe, just agitated, just felt like my nerves were like on fire. And I did what I could. Some of it was keeping busy, some of it was taking care of myself, some of it was going on a rigorous bike ride. It's like, and then I'm driving out there and it's wall-to-wall traffic. I live in Chicago, and even worse than usual. And so my driving, if I'm in a calm state, my driving, I think, is a good example of what you just said, because I will leave space ahead of me, because I just truly believe that's not only the polite thing to do, but the efficient thing to do. Like if there's more space between cars, we do a lot less like slamming on our brakes and stopping
Yes.
and going and rubber banding.
Yeah.
There's just more space in the system to sort of expand and contract.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's like a spinal column, like having the
Yeah.
appropriate amount of sort of whatever. Oh gosh, what's it called? Anyway, the tissue between the bones.
But almost nobody.
Cartilage.
Yeah. No, I like that. But no, almost nobody drives like that. So we'll see once we're all in automated cars. We'll get to finally see how the system regulates itself. Efficiently. But this person behind me was tailgating me and flickering their headlights at me.
Yeah.
And my best interpretation or story is because I was leaving some space ahead of me.
Yeah, they're like, pull up.
This was wall-to-wall traffic. The best case scenario for them would have been I would have pulled ahead the 15 or 20 feet.
Yeah.
And we would have been in the same scenario, except then just all compressed.
Just tight and 15 feet forward.
Yeah. I had two reactions. The more empathetic one was like, wow, I bet they're really agitated. I bet their nervous system is, there's something going on.
Yeah, something's firing.
They're not really considering the system. They're just like, why is this car leaving space?
Yeah.
And I have no idea. Like that's the problem with driving. You have such limited communication between horns and lights.
Mm-hmm.
And my other reaction was, get the fuck off my ass.
Yeah.
So, there's that part of me. But to be empathetic, it's funny when driving, I'll be like, I'll imagine they're my mother who doesn't have good eyesight, or my girlfriend will say, imagine they're constipated. I like that one.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I think that's not, to me, I can just immediately relate. Archie, my wife and I were just talking about this yesterday, and it's a feature of driving in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I moved to, that the positive, let me try to be positive first. Very few people use their horns, which is good for me. Horns make me.
I love that. Yeah, that's good.
Horns produce a fight or flight response in me for certain. Really, let's be honest, always fight. But here they ride your Batonski, especially on turns. So if you have to slow down to take a right turn, people behind you don't really slow down. So by the time I'm taking the turn, I'm like, oh dang, I got to take this turn like way hard, like drift. I have to like
smash into me.
Yeah, I have to like halfway drift around this turn. Ugh. But again, this does. Let me try. I think I can weave this back. This is akin to the phenomenon of fear, meaning like if I, especially in turns, right? If I, or even you, changing your practice of how you're proceeding in the flow of things. If you're going to get out of the flow, get into the flow, or stay in the flow in a different way, that generally the crowd energy, or whoever's in closest proximity to you energy, whoever you run into or interacting with, a lot of times, most people's energy is built towards, let's do things the way things are being done around us. So if you're going straight fast, just keep going straight fast, keep going straight fast. And it's like, I have to turn a right. That's my destination. I have to go there. That's where I'm going. I literally would end up somewhere completely waylaid if I just went with the flow of traffic forever. You can't, it's not possible. But I think we get into these loops in our own minds as well. And again, this is something, as I've been talking to you, and like you talk to me and you confront me on things that I like haven't really fully considered. So then it makes me go, okay, let me slow down. Let me leave some space then between me and the next thing. Let me not be like constantly push up and reduce the amount of space, because I'm kind of, I think we all constantly are looking for platforms on which to rest for a moment, so we don't have to think anymore. Let's get to a safe, like we're little furtive creatures running and finding a new place to hide, and then breathing and shaking and being like, okay, now what? I'm safe for a second. Now I can reassess. But traffic is a good example. Slow down. Bumper to bumper is good too, is more like the internet, because there's no actual rush on the internet necessarily to reply. We feel it. We feel it the same way we feel it in traffic, but it's like, I can respond to you in 19 hours and it really doesn't matter. It's not like an in-person conversation,
Unless it's a story.
Yes. Unless you leave those 3 little dots percolating for 24 hours. I always feel terrible when that happens, by the way. I just like logged onto a thread and I realized that Sometimes, especially on Instagram, like you'll put your comment up, but then your comment will remain in the thing, the exact same comment or whatever. And I went back and I was like, oh, this has been here for like 3 days. As though I was just like typing away for 3 days. And they're like, oh dang, this is gonna be long. But anyway, there's some,
people.
yeah.
If you were a celebrity, you could just like leave that, and you'd have like whole people like not showering for a week. Be like,
yeah, exactly.
I'm about to say something.
Oh my gosh, Dwayne the Rock Johnson is gonna talk to me. This is crazy. No, it's a butt type. You got butt typed by the Rock.
Well, one of the things that I realized we didn't talk about last time in the context of fear being dangerous was what happens when fear meets lethal force.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty obvious example of that would be a police officer.
Yeah.
And here's a topic that is almost immediately side taking or politicized or whatnot. So I don't know, maybe we'll dabble into that. But I think we could all agree that anybody carrying a loaded gun and actually sanctioned by our society to dole out lethal force has a hell of a lot of power, has the power to end life, has the power to destroy, has the power to at least harm people. And I'm not here to say that's all cops. I will say,
or that would apply to citizens too. I mean, citizens have.
Well, that's true. That's absolutely true.
Yeah, security guards, whatever.
Yeah, we could just say anybody with a gun.
Yeah.
Especially in America, we are very gun heavy.
Yeah.
I think I heard there were more guns than people here.
There are, yeah.
I heard that. It's true.
Yeah. No, it's totally a thing. Yeah. More guns. It's funny. Less people have guns than we have in the past, but there are more guns. It's interesting.
Yeah. And it's funny. I don't think I've ever been against that, even though I did not grow up in a gun family. We were
me neither.
Progressive academic.
Yeah.
My parents are teachers, Midwestern kind of thing. So, I was rural enough to be kind of around some people who at least went hunting and whatnot, but it was never that foreign. And I probably early on had some judgment like, well, guns should be for, hunting or whatever, but we have too many of them. But I don't know. I've never been like super anti-gun. I don't think so much of, I think what we might agree on is like a lot of this is about looking at our behavior, not sort of blaming the tool in a way, but really looking at how we are together and our behavior, regulating our nervous systems, which takes us back to fear. So yeah, we could talk about cops. We could really talk about anybody carrying a gun. The only difference there is, well, that's not it. That's funny. I was going to say the only difference is that the state has a monopoly on the legal use of lethal force, but that's not actually true. There's so many environments and situations where you are authorized by the state to kill somebody.
They certainly have obviously cops and military have greater leeway. They have greater legal leeway in the questioning of their decision making versus a quote unquote citizen.
Yeah.
And
I think, I mean, in that way, I think one thing I do want to say is I think we are over policed. I consider myself an abolitionist in that way, on the CPD and abolish the prisons. Although it's interesting, one of my colleagues has spent at least 10 years doing work in prisons, and she's like, there are 20% of the people are in prison. We need them to be there. Like they're not like, so,
Yeah.
There's nuance, dare I say, to everything.
I was just explaining that to my daughter last night, that I was like, there are some people, I was just explaining like force that, like, for example, this may relate, like responding with like yelling or whatever. It was like, sometimes there are people you have to yell at. You would have to yell at them. You might have to yell at them to stop them from doing something dangerous. You might want to yell at them to frighten them from doing something dangerous to someone else. There's sometimes you might have to punch someone in the face. These aren't these won't be applicable throughout your whole life. There will be sometimes you may have to actually try to you have to kill somebody because they're going to kill you or kill someone else. There are cases where all these things are appropriate. So we can't just say, oh, don't ever do that. You can say like, hopefully in your life you'll never have to do these things. But yeah, there are limits, so we can't, I mean, again, we could abolish the police as we know it, but we're going to need someone to do something in some organized, accountable fashion about acts of harm against others, which pretty much would be just a different word for police or for prison, right? What do you do with the people? You either have to kill them or you have to put them somewhere where they stop harming people, but it's basically, it's an adult version of timeout.
Yeah, right. And in some cases the answer is just exclude them, right? And
yeah, you can't,
hopefully
yeah.
I do hold that, healing, and I don't even like the word reform, but I'd rather stick with healing is possible for everybody, but I realize that's naive perhaps for some folks.
Well, I think it's the same for everybody. It has to be volitional. And this is the same instinct that you've been dealing with, like with people responding to, if you're like examining anything, that any preconceptions people don't have, that some people don't want to even look at. People have fear provoked and they don't even want to look at the whatever to make it benign. They don't want to look at the spider.
Right. Well, let's go there in a second. I want to read one thing in though. I'm reading this book, Sand Talk by Tyson Yunkaporta, who's an Aboriginal man from what we currently call Australia. And I'm just at this part where he's talking about gender, let's say, and which is, I know, a topic we've brought up here, and it's really fascinating, because he's just like, in Aboriginal culture, women fight, like women are badass, like there's so many women that could kick my ass, and we don't really socialize ourselves that like men carry all the force, and men are just the protectors and all of that. But one thing he said that really stood out to me is he's like, the way we, I'm paraphrasing poorly, but it's like the way we handle violence is to evenly distribute the ability to inflict violence as well as we can. So like everybody in a village would have access to the weapons all the way down to the children.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lock those up, right? And so in that way, it kind of connected something I've been thinking about gun rights in America, where I'm like, I'm not instantly just totally anti-gun and like nobody should have guns for a lot of reasons, all the way even down to the interpretation of the Second Amendment. And that really backed it up in a way. It's like, like if we all just have access to this, then it evenly distributes it in a way that actually reduces the likelihood that somebody will abuse it. I mean, that's my interpretation of what he
Sure. I mean, in some ways it spreads threat across the entire population, which sort of keeps a certain mindset restricted, because some people only are like bully, like the classic, whatever, like schoolyard bully, who is a bully until you punch him in the nose or whatever, those kind of folks. For other people, it might be exciting because it's like they want violence in response. But generally, it's going to keep people a little bit like, anyone can stop me. There's no hiding place for me if I'm far away from the police station or whatever, I know I'm in like a blind zone where the cops don't come or whatever, where you feel like, there's places in Chicago like that, where you're like, people know they can pursue massive amounts of violence with very little legal repercussion. And now, of course, there are people around them who can respond with violence as well. But the sort of the disproportionate, or not disproportionate, but like disproportionate meaning unequal, that a SWAT team can come in and overwhelm, a few gunmen or whatever, that a disproportionate response can sort of stop your violence. It's very interesting in that way. And I think actually this also correlates to fear as it has been manifesting in our society, is that people specifically feel disempowered. They actually aren't completely. They're empowered by culture, meaning they have accepted a way of life wherein they have outsourced their thinking to other outlets. So in some ways, they've given away the weapon of their own critical thought. They've given the weapon of their mind to someone else, and they're like, well, they'll take care of it. So in some ways, that Aboriginal sensibility is like, No, we all are equally contributing resistance to imposition. All of it's up to all of us. It's not like, and you look at the US, right? Think about how many crimes we've seen where people just like pull out their phones and they're
Yeah.
like, I just want to get this for World Star, as opposed to, no, it's everybody's responsibility to stop this. Like if someone is like just beating a large person is beating a small person and you don't know why. I'm not saying, listen, that small person molested that larger person's child or something and they just need to beat them maybe to death. I don't know. I'm not completely opposed to that, but I don't know that coming upon the scenario. I'm not going to pull out my phone and be like, look at this person getting their ass whipped. My instinct would be like, well, all I see is a bigger person beating a smaller person up. And I just use that because that's a classically American thing we don't like, right? The big guy beating up on the little guy, or the majority beating up on the minority, right? We don't like that. We're like that's in opposition to our sense of ourselves. So yeah, no, I mean, it seems like a wise thing. I don't mean to drag us off of talking about like gun stuff, because gun stuff's fun to talk about too. But I was like, I think you bringing that up just immediately was like, oh yeah, that does relate to all sorts of weaponry.
Yeah, well, and you were actually bringing me back to the murder of George Floyd, which wasn't a gun, but it was certainly a cop using their power. I think we can all agree on that.
Yes. Well, and I would actually say the most, looking back at it now, the most powerful power he used was his, in many ways, like his authority, his sort of generalized quote unquote authority, and in some ways, potentially his sobriety. Because on a one-to-one basis, George Floyd was a big dude.
Right.
And they both were bouncers together somewhere. So they both are men with the capacity for violence. So they knew each other, which is that's just so weird. But if you've ever had a drunk person get aggressive with you, you're like, drunk people are pretty easy to deal with.
Right.
You don't have to like fight real sensibly. You can usually actually just like, you can let them like get all mad and burn their steam out. You know what I mean? Even so, in some ways, he was like fully cogent. So in some ways, even though they're both grown men, it's a little bit like an adult, like really being rough with a child in that sense. Because if you're high as heck, you're not
right.
Or like when you're having sex with somebody who's super intoxicated, you're like, no, this is not a one-to-one scenario at all.
Right. And a lot of the justification, I think, for overuse of force, particularly the police, is fear.
Sure.
Like, I was afraid they were, and that's why I have empathy for cops. I mean, my God, I mean, I live here in Chicago. I've certainly talked to a few, and the things they have to face and go into. Like, who knows? I don't want to do that. I'm not a cop. And,
no, it's fully scary.
And what the reason I went there was because you were talking about this sort of bystander on the phone piece, and that's important that we have the ability to do that.
Sure.
And I was like imagining, well, if I was there, like, would I have gotten up in that cop's business and said, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" And I'm frankly probably not. I would have, and that's my fear, right? That's my fear that if I intervene, then all that force is going to be somehow turned towards me.
Sure. And the assumption, this is the cultural authority element of the uniform, or any uniform, I would say, not even a police uniform. If a person in a impeccably dressed a person was on top of a person shabbily dressed, I think, naturally immediately assume, well, that person looks put together, so they appear more sensible than the other person. These are legitimate claims of intellectual thought, but like, when someone has a cop's uniform on and they're on top of someone who doesn't have a cop's uniform on, we have this instinct of like, well, this is like what they do. This is literally their job. Same as if we saw a soldier on top of someone who didn't have a soldier's uniform on, you'd be like, well, all right, probably doing that for a reason. Just some part of you does it. You know what I mean? Whether or not that's true or not, that's just like, that's how our mental processes work. But partially based on fear too, of like, that still is just a person hurting another person, man. You know what I mean? Let's not get too distracted by fashion.
I mean, right now, I assume everything you're saying is channeled.
Exactly. I'm wearing a priest collar today. So if I was on top of you with my knee on your neck, people would be like, well, I mean, who are you going to go with here?
Well, and there's two examples. So last night, we went into the hospital after hours, and this guy who was just there visiting his mom, let us in. And he said something, I wish I could remember the exact word he used. I don't think this was it, but he said something like, well, they don't like it when I let people in, because there's vagrants who want to sleep here overnight or something.
Oh yeah.
He used a different word, but it doesn't matter. So there, right? I'm like, okay, well, why do you assume we're not here to sleep?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I was in my dad's like an assisted living, and I was just there last weekend. And one of his nurses thought I was a doctor. I was wearing a fucking burnt orange hoodie from REI. I mean, my fashion sense, as you can see now, is something akin to like, I'm always, one step up, ready to put out the door to go camping. I mean, that's sort of how I vibe.
That's pretty doctory. I've seen a lot of just
Really?
like, especially, well, REI is high test. I picture doctors in like New Balance shoes. You know what I mean? They wear like fleece, sensible things. I can totally see that.
That's
Well,
funny.
and your height, and you've got some hair loss. All these things make you seem like as an like a potential authority figure.
What are you talking about? Do you know how terrified I am of hair loss? Talk about fear.
Yeah. No. But I'm saying all those things make you seem like, oh, you're an older man. You have a deep voice. You're taller. And then you're wearing an REI, which is not, I mean, that's like, that place is pricey, dude. Like when I want to buy like clothes or camping gear that I know is going to be like awesome, that's where I would go. Normal people, like not wealthy people, would go to Walmart or the thrift store, or like a flea market. So REI, as soon as you said REI, I was like, nope, I totally get it. I mean, I know you, so I'm like, what is wrong with this person? But stepping out of myself, not that you couldn't have been a doctor. I just am like, that is not who you are in that realm.
I'm not nearly consistently enough academically to be a doctor, but you know the way I do research. I'd be like, I don't know. I mean, I read an article like this is probably how to do this surgery. It's all good.
I've interacted with many medical professionals, and I'm telling you, their depth of knowledge on many subjects is about as shallow. That's right. In your face, doctors. I'm literally arguing with the doctor on Twitter right now, like just this morning, because he was like, there are no studies that show that vaccinated people are more likely to be infected. And I was like, I love when people say absolute things. And I was like, oh, good. All I have to do is show one, and then your entire statement is false, and you'd have to recant it because you are a medical professional on Twitter dispensing your medical opinion. So that would be pretty important for you to say that. And then, of course, I think I shared 6, maybe 4 or 5 or 6. And I was like, just so you know, this has been happening forever. So, and I asked too, I was like, why do you have this misapprehension? But again, I tie that in too, just because these are symbols of authority, which then cause us to, I think, reduce, like, let our fear, because our fear is always involved in these kind of circumstances. If an authority figure tells you to do something, tells you something is true, is harming someone, some part of us is like, has a survival instinct of this is conflict, I don't want to get involved. So then it immediately looks for, give me a B. I need a B. I need some symmetry on this. Something confirm that I don't have to have responsibility.
So I think I see a path back to weave a couple of things. One is, I think I mentioned it a few times, but the book My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, I think does a wonderful job of like looking at the trauma body and looking at 3 trauma bodies: the white European ancestor trauma body, Black African ancestor trauma body, particularly enslaved Africans who came to America, and the blue body, which is pretty rare actually, to look at, like, what does it look like for the police in their trauma body. And there's some, of course, in a lot of ways are generalizations, and in some ways I believe there are characteristics that are just inherited or just common the way we're socialized or the way that job works. But all of it basically boils down to trauma and healing and regulating our nervous systems, particularly around fear. The difference, as we said in a couple different ways, is what happens when we mix in lethal force or a lethal weapon with that fear. Unregulated, trauma body. So I don't know that there's much more to say about that other than that's what we need to be doing, is regulating ourselves. And there's an argument that, like the more lethal force, the more potential for harm and death. Perhaps the more attention needs to be put on.
I think that's the great thing that we need to pay attention to generally is, I would even say, the spectrum of force going all the way up to lethal force, meaning that which ends a life, right? This came up in the abortion conversation, right? That which like ceases a life is like on the sort of the end of the spectrum, really. I mean, you could involve torture or whatever, that sort of thing. Be like, well, it's kind of worse because it's a death that lasts really long. But anyway, generally speaking, like lethal force is at one end, and then compulsion of any sort, like, because then there's whatever alchemical energetic force that people exhibit. You can do it in person, you could do it. Then there's like the force of increased volume of your voice. Then there's force of literal, like, physical assault by security guards, let's say, right? So like, let's say the fear of, because this is one of my favorite topics, the fear of the unvaccinated, right? Leads someone to then call security to remove you because they have a mandate in place in this place of business. You're not supposed to be here unless you're vaccinated. So then physical force in that continuum of like, once you get into actual physical harm, like harm in the verifiable sense, I guess, and violence. Once force, true force is involved, as opposed to all the other like previous semi forces. And force is the underpinning of all. I probably got to be careful saying all, but let's just say nearly all, maybe all, all rules, all of them. You know what I mean? Any like rule you have, you're like, okay. And we all recognize this from a very early age. Some of us slightly earlier than others, depending on our like tendency towards conformity or rejection of conformity. Everything is based on force because every kid eventually goes, oh yeah, well, what are you going to do about it? You can't. You have to sit down in your chair. Tommy, you got to sit down. Yeah, I have to. What are you going to do about it? What if I don't? Okay, well, then you're going to have this punishment and this punishment. How are you going to make me do that punishment? Well, you got to go to detention. Well, okay, how are you going to make me do that? Well, if you don't take detention, you're going to be suspended from school. How are you going to make me do that? These are basic questions we ask in the very least, like somewhere in that 1st to 4th grade range. At least that's what happened for me, more in like 3rd grade, I'd say. And it already happens with your parents, but then it starts happening with like outside quote unquote authority figures, which relates more to cops, doctors, all these sorts of people. Like, what are you going to do? Eventually it's physical. It's all physical. Every law that we have in the United States of America has the weight of physical violence, of force behind it, or else it doesn't exist. Just like, because there's too many, and again, many people will just go along with it because they're like, they don't want to upset people. But again, I don't know if it's 20% or what the percentage of people is that just will be like, well, no, just from an intellectual sense, who are you to exert any authority over me? I'm a fully sovereign, autonomous human being. That's even just a percentage of people who are resistant to imposition. Then there's a whole chunk of people who actually just really like doing terrible things. You know what I mean? There are people who just love exhibiting force over people, love punching people in the face. We've seen this, you see this in positions where people are granted authority. And I think we should all be concerned about, let's say police are a good example. Soldiers are another great example. I don't think it's undue to suggest there are people who get into that sort to work out the trauma and like regain their power. But there are certainly people who get in there because they like to do harm to people. And then they get a career where they have carte blanche to do so. We see this with the same thing with surgeons or whatever, right? The like the high propensity for sociopaths amongst like high performing surgeons. They want the power of God. They want the power of God in their hands. Same thing with soldiers. If you have a gun in your hand, that's the appeal. You might not even ever want to commit violence, but you like to hold the power of God in your hand. Like I have the power of life and death. Yeah. It's pretty wild. And then you can understand if people are afraid of power. That's another fear element. If people are afraid of power, even not say, let's get real in depth, afraid of their own power, then my goodness gracious, you've got a phenomenally fearful culture, and the Aboriginal idea is good. Let everyone embrace their capacity for power. And then I think would be a lot less fearful generally. But again, when you outsource, so when someone has to talk, they've outsourced their thinking, then they have to talk to you on a one-to-one basis about something that an authority figure told them. They don't know how to respond. They're like, but there's no cops here. You know what I mean? They immediately almost get in that situation. There's no authority figure here to protect me. I gotta go.
Right.
Which is outlandish, but it's understandable.
Right. We're outsourcing that regulation instead of just handling it with each other. And
yeah. Figuring out how to breathe and think.
And I agree. Like, I think so much, I just kind of measure things and like, is this a punitive approach to governance generally? And that could be it could be way less sort of dangerous. And like, just like, how are we operating in this office environment?
Yes.
Are we demanding something and even subconsciously promoting energy that is really has a punitive sort of accountability attached to it, or are we finding a way to like truly work together and like find a common reason we want to do this thing? And
persuasive, even, like, and not in a bad way.
Yeah, and that's funny you say that, because I realized, like, just the other day I was sort of confronted with the idea of like stating my case, like arguing for something, and I realized a lot of times I just sort of want to present something and be like, well, isn't this obviously like the thing you want, or the right thing? It's like, you know, and I think I'm more of a writer than an orator in that way, and so that can be challenging, but all that means is I just need to sort of think it through ahead of time. But one thing I wanted to come back to was something that came up this week, is I've been, as you know, poking the internet a little bit more, as well as my own groups. I think we talked last time, because I think it was really alive for me, like what was happening in one of my men's groups around trying to even socialize the ideas that you've been talking about for so long, and we've been talking about for several months, around the idea of vaccine segregation particularly, and what are the real implications of that. And I'm not going to like open all of that back up, but you had shared this photo is so tiny I can't see the whole thing, but it was an apology. It was like a cafe in Melbourne, I think. It's abbreviated. And it was a cafe that was actually apologizing for excluding unvaccinated people. Which was a pretty remarkable. I don't know how many examples of that are happening. I assume they're an extraordinary.
I've literally seen 2, I think.
Okay. So, and I just, it's funny. Like sometimes if I'm like, I am afraid of this subject. Actually, a couple of fears that are coming up for me. Like I relate to what you were saying, like the fear of power. Like that's been a huge part of my journey around even like power and privilege. Like yes, I am afraid of my power. And that's something I continue. Pretty much, I'm always working through. And in this way, this brings us back to fear and the pandemic, and it's less maybe obvious, right? Because a cop holding a gun and sort of the power dynamics and the fear might be easier to sort of see if we just saw that, we could like diagram it, Now, in this case, it's harder, and I think that's a lot of what we've been talking about. Is like, well, what are the numerous layers? And I remember even in the beginning, like I was like, Brendan, well, people are afraid of, and you're like, what are they afraid of? I'm like, they're afraid of the virus, and you're like, what? We've been through all that. So I wanted to read this piece. So I sometimes if I just want something to be a little more ephemeral, or I'm just tiptoeing out, I'll do it as an Instagram story, because I know that won't last as long.
Oh, darn it. I have to stop you right mid-sentence. I'm about to poop myself. Hold on. Be right back.
Okay. All good. Here we are. I just wanted to read this response. So I had, just shared a story on Instagram, and this is interesting too. Like germane to what I was just saying. Like often I'll just share something and I don't add commentary. Like you're way better at that. Like you add, and sometimes that's laziness, or sometimes it's like that strong neutrality maybe you mentioned earlier.
Like
I'm just presenting this, and a lot of people would infer that it's like, oh, well, if you're sharing it, you agree with it. I'm like, well, don't ever think that. Like I'm just sharing things because I think it's provocative or interesting, or whatever.
That's a popular thing on Twitter. people put in their bios. They'll say retweets don't equal endorsements.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I should
Like,
do that.
kind of
So,
establish.
so, and this was about, this apology from this cafe in Melbourne. And,
Oh yeah.
Oh, it's funny. I did offer a slight commentary, very brief commentary on this one. It's a
Yeah.
start. It's a start. ...
Yeah.
That's what I said. And,
Yeah.
and then she just said very briefly, "Huh?" Question mark.
Yeah.
And it's somebody I've known for a long time. I wouldn't say we're super close, but we haven't. But we intersect here and there. I happen to know she's immunocompromised, and so she said, "Huh?" And then I did explain myself a bit more, and I said, "Hello. While I'm vaccinated and boosted myself, it's also come to my attention that the laws and regulations preventing unvaccinated folks from participating in society were unwarranted and ultimately did not further the goal of protecting the vulnerable. While many just want to gloss over this error in judgment that led to exclusion, I think it's notable when someone is willing to apologize."
Yeah, that's pretty clear.
So she says, "Surprising. I don't know that the science backs this, my friend." So pretty open.
Yeah. Yeah.
As someone who's highly vulnerable, not being exposed to people carrying the virus kept me from getting sick and possibly dying, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. People who are unvaccinated are much more likely to be carrying the virus. And when they choose not to act in the best interest of their community, they need to be held accountable.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's police language.
Well, and I think what I'm interested in with this apology is that it is a kind of accountability.
Yeah.
That's so alive right now that this,
Yeah.
and I was noodling on this, I think on my bike ride, I was like, would we even be talking about COVID amnesty if somebody didn't recognize that something wrong was done? Like if there's a defensive posture being put forth,
Yeah.
or an avoidant posture of like, can we just kind of leave this one behind?
Yeah.
And I think you've dug way deeper into all that than I have, but I'm gonna assert that she's has a fear-based motivation to be distanced from the virus and from danger. And I'm not saying that's wrong as a basic mode of being. You put it well the other day, like we prioritize our threat response as humans, or as any animal probably.
Yeah, totally normal.
And yet, as open as sort of non-conclusive as her language was around, like, oh, I know what the science is.
Sure.
She was also like keeping herself perhaps from exploring a deeper, just an alternate point of view. I'll just put it that way. Just what else? So that to me, that's this much more complex puzzle of when does fear, create such a hardened view of how we need to be together.
Yeah.
That, I don't think we continue to explore is how could that possibly validate, segregative policies and then
literal use of force.
Right.
Yeah. But I think at that point, at this point, so deep, we watched it all happen we watched it from March 2020. We watched the Coast Guard. I don't know. I think everyone saw the footage eventually. We watched the Coast Guard in California drive their boats out onto the water and literally physically grab a man who was on a paddleboard because of the viral danger, quote unquote. It was an insane act then. It made no sense, but it was use of physical force for those who didn't comply with what the government said was the best way for us to deal with this other danger. So physical threat. So physical force was used. I don't know if you've seen them. I've seen tons of them, of footage of people being hauled off by police on all fours. Literally 4 police, one holding each arm, one each holding each leg. I've seen those tons of times, cities across the country, for people who were like getting on buses or subways without masks on. So we've seen physical force criminalizing a certain responsive person or non-responsive, as the case may be. So at that point, again, you get into the fear-based assumption, which is anyone an authority figure is wrangling with is a bad person. So like, for example, this is her thinking style through fear, through what you're saying, like appraisal of actual danger. So that's a legitimate aspect. Then leads her to say, well, then I don't want to be like, if let's say I don't want to be then around dangerous people. So you could look at, but by the same token, you could look at like murder or rape statistics being like disproportionately like found under certain racial categories, and then be like, well, I'm a 4'11" woman, 100 and whatever, 1 pounds. I can't be around people who are more likely to rape me. So I can't go, they shouldn't let any black men in clubs, or 20, who knows, 20 something year old white guys. I don't know the statistics, but like there are certain categories of people who are absolutely more likely statistically to rape me. So it's a real fear, but then you then just think it's okay to then remove a whole category of people based on that fear, your personal fear. And you're like, well, and then the crazy thing is, then fear leads you to then go, that's why this was effective. So then say, let's say a whole year goes by when they do this and they don't allow black men and white men of certain ages into clubs because it's dark and there are women there for a whole year. And you're like, well, that's why I didn't get raped. For sure. That's not sensible, but it's when someone allows fear to allow force on their behalf, in order to protect them, in which case then, this is the amazing thing about force. We love force. Force helps us feel safe. Knowing there's someone who can protect us from something actually dangerous it's a great feeling. You know what I mean?
Trust the force. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, you got to trust the force. But no, you do, right? So if there's somewhere like for marauding animals, right? You're very excited if a bear wants to kill you and someone has a gun. You're like, oh, I'm so glad, like someone, because I'm not going to win a fist fight with a bear. So whatever, like that's sort of, it's such a complicated relationship on how to like solve fear, which then grants all these sort of adherences, which are good socially, meaning then we regard those who protect us as worthy of respect, admiration, love, that sort of thing. That's good, right? So this is why it can be so difficult to unravel fear as it manifests in force, because there's things that are positive and negative about society,
Yeah, and we're gonna need to come in for a landing, and obviously,
let's do it.
Talk about. But I think you really actually sort of wove that together, and you brought in this quality of fear providing like validation or correlation, and
Yes.
it may be what's happening is, well, this is sort of what I thought 2 years ago, and I was certainly in that camp.
Yeah.
I'm still alive.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Ergo that's why, because we had the vaccine, because we were segregated, I'm still alive.
Yeah.
Which is, I know why you're such a strong proponent of like, no, let's actually look at science, because that's an objective reality. Hopefully we can all,
Yeah,
that gets us out of, because I know I am an intuitive, and often that leads to a subjective reasoning.
Sure.
And there's value to that. And yet,
yes,
in this case, it's like, but no, like, can we have like tangible, clear, evidence based approaches to figuring out what's really happening here?
Yeah, which is, and again, takes you back to cop. It threads you back to everything, the cop stuff, to everything. You have to be like, oh, I was afraid. Were you right to be afraid? Like, was it okay that you were so afraid that you ended up using violent force, or force at all? Literally, why putting your hands on somebody, or literally putting force of like, you can't come in here, or else we're going to throw you out. I was just watching someone just show the clip the other day. They like brought it back. They were saying in this whole pandemic embassy thing, which we'll talk about in the next episode, but like, we're not going to forget this. And it was police and the owner of a restaurant kicking a 5-year-old out of a restaurant, like literally standing there and like, be like, we're going to physically take you and your family out because the kid wasn't vaccinated. So they literally kicked a child and his family out because the child wasn't vaccinated. So physical force was used. And so all of these any secretive practices, whether it's at a place of business or anything, force is involved in all of these. And so to me, that's where once you're going to start to use force, we better have some ding dang objective evidence, because we can't just go on that instinctual feeling, because we're so often wrong. It can tell us what we need to examine, right? And we're like, oh, I feel this way. Let me go see if that's real. So I think subjective response is enormously relevant, and people should be honored in the fact of having that feeling. But then we have to, we just have to come and bring, like, okay, is that a reasonable fear? Because let's get rid of, at least as much as we can, let's get rid of all the fear we don't need.
Oh, that's a beautiful note to land on.
Yeah.
Talk to you soon.
I love you.
Bye.
Bye.